Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Conversations with PH and welcome to Money Conversations. We're still talking about money, and I'm so glad that this topic is resonating with a lot of people as intended. And we're continuing with Money Conversations. The last episode we spoke about money, riches, and wealth. I was glad to see that everybody agrees that, you know what, let's get money, let's live rich, and let's build, generational wealth. Today, we're talking about money still, and we are just unpacking what we spoke about last time. We said that when it comes to wealth, specifically, it refers to net worth, which obviously then talks about buying assets to increase, your wealth, to build wealth. And when we start looking at the average South African, they work 8 hours a day, about 45 hours a week, 20 days a month, right? And this is also that they can actually get a salary or a wage at the end of the month. So we actually spend majority of our time working so that we can actually get that SMS at the end of the month that says imali ngenile, that kittling that comes into your bank account. So this generally then becomes our main source of income. If we're now talking about wealth, then the first step when it comes to building wealth would be to increase your income, and in this case would mean that you need to be looking at increasing your salary, you need to be looking at increasing your wage. So today we are definitely talking about the secrecy of salaries and wages. Generally, when you talk about salaries, it's a hush conversation. People don't want to talk about it. They want to hide they pay slips, etc. So today we're really just talking about the secrecy of salaries and wages, because we really spend most of our times trying to earn it. Let me start off the conversation with, are you comfortable with disclosing your salary? And should you maybe not, should you be comfortable with disclosing your salary? One of the first things we mentioned is that when we started off this series is that there's a lot of self-value attached to money, right? So because of that, unfortunately, it means you can't just be talking to anybody about your money, because whether you earn little or you earn a lot, it's likely to be used as a weapon against you. If you earn too much money, or what's considered to be more, people will somehow feel entitled to your money and, want a cut and want to dictate how you should spend it. There's an expectation, right, to say, hey, you earn so much anyway, surely you can give me X, Y, Z. Whereas if you earn too little, there's a high risk that you'll actually end up losing your street cred, because now people will start thinking they can't take you seriously because, hey, that person actually earns a lot of money. So the fact that society still has that perception where we say value really is determined on money, unfortunately, you can't just be talking to anybody about it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to anybody, as in now you must just keep it to yourself. No. What's important is that you need to benchmark your salary, your wage, basically benchmark yourself against what your peers are earning, people in the same role as you, or if you identify a role that you'd like to obviously take on in future, you need to at least have a better understanding of what earnings are attached to that particular role, so at least whether or not the combos are communicating, right, as in the amount of effort you're going to be putting in will be matching what you're going to be getting out. So funny thing though is that every time I ask people about money, or I speak to people about money and ask them how much they earn, first thing is that they are like, hey, I'm underpaid. I am underpaid. This company's not paying me enough. Now the question becomes, what is this based on? If you're saying you're underpaid, what are you basing this analysis on? Is it even an analysis really? Because you'll find that most of the time, this is more like of an opinion, not necessarily backed up by facts. But then again, how are you going to know the facts if you're not really talking about how much you earn? So I'd like to introduce a concept that's This concept is, you might have heard about it, especially if you are in the job market, if you have a job, etc. The concept is market-related remuneration or market-related salaries. So what are we referring to exactly when we're talking about market-related salaries? Basically, it talks about the rate the job market in this case, we're looking at employers, are willing to pay for a particular role. So it's generally determined, this market-related remuneration is generally determined by an independent body of researchers, and they will basically gather this information from participating companies. So there'll be a survey that probably goes out, and they'll do literally a comparison. So they'll benchmark salaries based on roles and responsibilities, comparing it to different organizations, and then based on that analysis be able to say, for this particular role, this is the actual salary range or the salary expectation, i.e. the market-related remuneration. This remuneration comes as a band or a range, so it generally has a minimum amount and a maximum amount. As for where you fall or where you would fall within this range, really is determined by various factors, which we will unpack a bit later. And it is actually said that there are certain companies that share this information with their employees. So they'll say, for these particular roles, this is the actual salary band, or this is the actual pay range. I don't think this is the norm. With people that I've engaged with, rarely that they would actually disclose that these are the roles in the organization and this is what you can expect. This information is generally held by HC, and you likely never really to come across it unless you maybe even ask. So it's definitely not the norm. In most cases, actually, if you're looking to determine what market-related salaries look like, you will have to surf the net, do some web searches, hopefully come across reports that specifically talk to that role or that particular industry to at least get an understanding of where exactly you should be aiming, right? So, but even with that, the accuracy is a bit questionable, because you might find that the range is so wide that it makes it so difficult for you to determine where exactly you would fall. And also you might find that the figure might not necessarily be applicable to your organization, especially if the organization was not part of the companies that were actually interviewed for that particular research. So definitely we know that for every role, there is a salary range that exists, and it will have a minimum amount as well as a maximum amount. So now that we know this, whether your company has told you this information or not, the range exists. Now the next question would be, how would your specific salary be determined? If we say the range, and you'll find that the range is like, the range can be really large, making it very difficult to determine where you stand. But the factors that are generally included, or that are actually considered when now determining where to place you, are things like your skills, your level of experience, the qualifications as well that you're bringing to the table. Another huge factor has to do with the company's budget. Even if maybe the industry says this is how much we're offering for this particular role, if the company has less budget, you're likely to then receive less. Or if their budget is more, you're more likely to also receive more than that. Another key thing would be location. Location seems to play a huge role as well in terms of salaries. The argument here is that the cost of living differs depending on where you live. So you'll find that for the same role, you might be offered different salaries depending on where you are located. So if you're in Bloemfontein, in Cape Town, or in Joburg, whatever the case may be, you might find that all three, although the role might be the same, the pay might be significantly different. Or maybe you're just overseas, even more of a difference. So that's definitely some of the factors that are considered in determining your specific salary. And then another factor would be different companies generally place different levels of importance to specific roles. So if you're in a particular company that doesn't really place a a huge importance in a particular role, it is more likely that the salary for that particular role will be less. Whereas if they place a lot of value in that particular role, obviously then the salary itself will also increase to match that level of importance. So then what this means is that you might have people working in the same industry, however getting paid differently, even though they might sometimes be in the same band, or it might be different, simply because the company's level of importance is different for that particular role. So it is clear then that the amount that eventually goes on to your offer letter really takes into consideration many factors. It's not a clear cut, this is how much we're going to pay you. Yes, there's a range, and then in just determining how much we must offer you specifically, there are many other factors that contribute to making that decision. Now, the next thing that I want us to consider is, if the factors are clear, like I've stated now, right, and they can be substantiated with facts, we've said it's a location, it's experience, skills, etc. And ideally, then everybody would be following these same principles, the same process when it comes to giving you the actual salary or the number that they're willing to pay you. Why is there then a drive, right? A drive to close specific pay gaps? Why are pay gaps even a thing? Like, why are pay gaps a thing, that a topic for discussion, right? Because the process seems very clear. This is what we look at, therefore we will compensate you accordingly. However, when you start doing your research, you actually realize that one of the biggest pay gaps that exist globally, not just in South Africa, not in our country, but globally, is the gender pay gap. In fact, last year, in 2022, specifically for South Africa, the UASA determined that women in South Africa get paid up to 35% less than their male counterparts. So a male in the same role, probably same experience, etc., will be earning 35% more. That's a huge pay gap, right? And also it's global. So the stats that I've just given you is just for SA, but the numbers are probably similar, if not more, across the globe. Another pay gap that does also exist would be the ethnicity gap, which in essence means that you might find that you'll be paid differently depending on whether you're black, you're white, colored, mixed race, etc. So for these gaps to exist, then it clearly means there's another factor that's at play. There's another factor that's considered when giving somebody their salary or their number. And this element is rather subjective, because everything else we've mentioned, it was quite clear what it is that people are looking at. But for these gaps to exist, there's a subjective element to it, really. So then I want to ask you specifically, especially those of you that are working, how are these stats looking in your organizations? Have these ever been shared with you? Have they ever been discussed? Do you even know which people are affected by these pay gaps currently in your organization? I've always found it interesting that top management will always make references to these stats. However, no detailed, feedback on findings is ever provided. Many organizations, you'll see articles about it. When it's time for organizations to speak to their financials, they might make references to it. But internally, nobody really gives detailed findings to say, this is what we found, this is what we're doing about it. What's even more interesting, and actually maybe even more disheartening, is that the people who generally are bold enough to ask questions when it comes to these things, they end up with a target on their backs, right? They end up being labeled as instigators, like, why are you asking too many questions? You're causing problems, you're causing commotions. In some instances, it can even just be a career limiting move. So it is disheartening, but these are facts. So, what is the solution here, really? What is the solution? I said the solution in this case is transparency. I honestly believe that companies should be required to disclose salary ranges for all roles. And this information should not just be reserved for, human capital, for HC. It should be published internally as internal comms. And any job that is posted, any opening that is posted, should have a salary expectation attached to it. Why can't we just share this information so people can know where they stand, or at least know what to expect? And it's a range up to all, so you could be sitting anywhere within that range, right? Because if I'm working for company X, I should be able to tell where I stand. Even when I'm mapping out, my career path in the organization, I should have an idea of what my earnings could potentially look like as I move up, across, etc. I think transparency is really key. Then obviously the big one, the elephant in any room really, this policy that prohibits salary discussions, I honestly think that it needs to be reviewed. And perhaps we need a labor expert, right, when it comes to this one, because when I did my research on this matter, my research tells me really that the law actually only prohibits the discussion of other people's remuneration, but you can actually talk about your own. So I don't know, maybe we need legal experts here to intervene, but my findings really were, don't discuss other people's remuneration, but yours you can. We need clarity here, and we need proper reviews, and we need proper understanding of what can be said, what can't be said. And if we feel so strongly about things not being said, why? Why is that the case? If we look at listed entities are required to disclose full disclosure of directors' remuneration. If that is done at that level, why can't we filter it down to other levels as well, right? And again, I say, salary ranges are all we're asking for. At least let me benchmark and know in which area should I be playing. So I honestly think it's time we stopped making how much we earn a secret. It's the secrecy that leads to exploitation. If we had more transparency, honestly, pay gaps will be a thing of the past. It would never even be something that exists. And if it exists, it would be substantiated with facts. People would be able to back it up. And also, a person should really just get to a point where the amount of money that you're getting paid is linked to your skills, it's linked to your experience, it's linked to your qualifications and the work that's required. It should be clear. There should be clear expectations of every role, so that even when people are negotiating, right, negotiations are fair, because we know what the range is. Even when we assessing you, we know what you bringing to the table, and it can be a fair negotiation. But if you're going in blindly, who has the upper hand really? Because sometimes you don't even know what the budget for that particular role was. So that's my take on salaries and wages, that they should not be a secret. I'm very interested to hear what everybody else thinks, and I hope that I have sparked some conversations, sparked some thinking really regarding your own perceptions in terms of whether or not you want to be telling people, talking at least to relevant people about how much you earn, benchmarking, especially with peers, with industry expectations, etc. Just the importance of knowing where you stand. And if you think that you're underpaid, what is that based on? Is it just you and your opinion, or can you back it up with facts? And once you figured out where you stand, then the question becomes, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about that information? Thank you so much for joining us today. This is episode 3 of Money Conversations. And remember, let's keep the conversations going. Hopefully you can take this topic to your next social gathering. Share your thoughts and hear what everybody else thinks. But the point of this is really just to keep the conversation going. Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Cheers.